It was a quiet afternoon in the heart of downtown, where the streets buzzed with the usual rhythm of life. People moved about their day, some rushing to catch buses, others stopping by shops or cafes. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting soft shadows on the pavement. Among the crowd was Laura Bennett, a young woman whose presence stood out not because of her appearance but because of her situation. She was pregnant and confined to a wheelchair after being involved in a car accident months earlier. Despite her circumstances, Laura had learned to adapt, finding strength in her resilience and determination to live her life as normally as possible. Laura had been running errands that day, navigating the busy sidewalks with practiced ease. Her wheelchair, though cumbersome at times, was her lifeline now, allowing her to stay independent despite her injuries. She had just finished picking up a few groceries from a nearby store and was making her way toward the curb when she decided to pause for a moment. Her bag needed adjusting. It had slipped slightly off her shoulder, and so she stopped near the edge of the sidewalk, leaning forward carefully to fix it. It was a simple action, one she had done countless times before. But on this particular day, it would lead to an unexpected and terrifying encounter. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a distant rumble, growing louder with each passing second. Laura glanced up briefly, her attention caught by the sound. A group where they weaved between cars and pedestrians with reckless abandon. At the front of the pack was a man named Blake, a towering figure with a scruffy beard and a leather jacket, adorned with patches that hinted at his biker affiliations. His face was set in a permanent scowl, and his eyes darted around as if searching for something or someone to take his frustration out on. As the bikers approached the intersection where Laura was stopped, Blake's irritation became evident. He muttered something under his breath, clearly annoyed by the slow-moving traffic and the pedestrians cluttering the area. When he spotted Laura's wheelchair blocking part of the narrow sidewalk, his patience snapped. "Move it!" he barked, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Laura flinched at the sudden shout, startled by its harshness. She quickly tried to maneuver her wheelchair out of the way, but the cramped space made it difficult to do so smoothly. Blake didn't wait for her to finish. Instead, he revved his engine loudly, drawing even more attention to himself. Some bystanders turned to watch, curious about what was happening. Others looked away, hoping to avoid any potential drama. But no one stepped forward to intervene. Not yet. Emboldened by the lack of resistance, Blake swung his leg over his bike and dismounted, striding toward Laura with an aggressive gait. His heavy boots thudded against the pavement, each step echoing ominously in the tense atmosphere. "You deaf or something?" Blake snarled as he reached her, looming over her seated form. Laura shrank back instinctively, clutching the handles of her wheelchair tightly. Her heart raced, fear gripping her chest as she realized how vulnerable she was in that moment. "I said move," he repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. Before Laura could respond or even attempt to comply, Blake acted. With a swift and brutal motion, he kicked the side of her wheelchair, sending it lurching sideways. The force of the impact caused her to lose balance, and she cried out as the chair tipped over, spilling her onto the ground. Pain shot through her body, sharp and unrelenting, and panic surged within her as she thought of her unborn child. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as she lay there helpless and humiliated. The commotion drew gasps from the onlookers who had been watching silently until now. Some whispered among themselves, horrified by what they had witnessed. Others simply stared, frozen in shock. No one dared to confront Blake, who stood over Laura with a sneer, clearly pleased with himself. He spat a string of insults at her, mocking her condition and daring anyone to challenge him. His friends cheered him on, egging him to continue, his tirade while revving their engines in support. But then, amidst the chaos, a voice rang out clear and commanding. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" All eyes turned to the source of the interruption. Standing a short distance away was John Cina, a man whose presence commanded immediate attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, he exuded an aura of calm authority that contrasted sharply with the aggression emanating from Blake and his gang. John had been walking nearby, enjoying a rare moment of downtime after grabbing lunch from a local cafe, when he noticed the commotion. Without hesitation, he had stepped forward, drawn by instinct and a deep-seated belief in standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. John's words hung in the air, silencing the jeers and taunts of the bikers. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as everyone processed what was happening. Laura, still lying on the ground, looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Would this stranger truly intervene, or would he end up making things worse? Blake, however, wasn't intimidated. If anything, he seemed amused by the interruption. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" he sneered, crossing his arms defiantly. John didn't respond right away. Instead, he knelt beside Laura, gently helping her sit upright. His movements were careful and deliberate, ensuring he didn't cause her further discomfort. Once she was stable, he turned his gaze back to Blake, his expression hardening. "Someone who doesn't tolerate bullies," he replied evenly, his voice carrying a weight that left no room for misinterpretation. The tension in the air thickened as the two men locked eyes, each sizing the other up. Blake's confidence faltered, slightly, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of bravado. He glanced at his friends, seeking reassurance, but they remained silent, uncertain of what to do next. Meanwhile, the crowd began to stir, murmurs spreading like wildfire as people recognized the famous wrestler standing before them. For Laura, the moment felt surreal. Here was a man she had seen on television countless times, known for his strength and charisma, now kneeling beside her in the middle of a chaotic scene. His kindness and composure offered a stark contrast to the cruelty she had just endured, and for the first time since the incident began, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. As John rose to his full height, positioning himself between Laura and Blake, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a story that would highlight both the worst and best of humanity. Blake's sneer deepened as he took a step closer to John, his boots scraping against the pavement. His chest puffed out in an attempt to appear more intimidating, but it was clear from the way his eyes darted around that he wasn't entirely sure how to handle this unexpected turn of events. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Blake spat, his voice dripping with mockery. "Just because you're big doesn't mean you can boss me around." John didn't flinch. He stood tall, his posture relaxed yet firm, exuding a quiet confidence that seemed to unnerve Blake even further. "I'm not trying to boss anyone around," John replied calmly, his tone measured and steady. "But what you did to her, that's not okay. You don't treat people like that, especially someone who's pregnant." The mention of Laura's pregnancy seemed to strike a chord with the onlookers, many of whom had been too afraid to speak up earlier. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, some expressing outrage, others voicing their agreement with John. One woman clutched her purse tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line as she watched the scene unfold. Another man shook his head in disbelief, muttering under his breath about how wrong Blake's actions were. Blake, however, wasn't listening. His pride wouldn't allow him to back down now, not with his friends watching and the growing audience, casting judgmental glances his way. "She was in my way," he shot back defensively, pointing a finger at Laura, who was still seated on the ground behind John. "She should have moved faster. It's not my fault she's slow." "She's in a wheelchair," John countered sharply, his voice rising slightly but remaining controlled. "Did you really expect her to just jump out of your way? Use your brain for once." Blake's face reddened at the insult and he clenched his fists, clearly struggling to keep his temper in check. For a moment it seemed like he might lash out again, but instead he let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I get it now," he said, narrowing his eyes at John. "You're one of those guys who thinks he's better than everyone else because he's famous or whatever. Well, let me tell you something, nobody tells me what to do." John sighed, shaking his head slightly as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "This isn't about being famous," he said, his tone softening but still carrying an edge of authority. "This is about doing the right thing, and kicking a pregnant woman in a wheelchair, that's not the right thing." The crowd murmured again, louder this time, and Blake glanced around nervously, sensing that the tide was turning against him. Some of the onlookers had pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. Others had begun stepping forward, forming a loose semicircle around the scene as if to create a barrier between Blake and Laura. Even the bikers who had accompanied Blake seemed uneasy, exchanging uncertain looks with each other. One of them, a younger man with a shaved head and tattoos running up his arms, leaned over to whisper something to Blake. "Maybe we should just go," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the idling motorcycles. But Blake ignored him, his focus locked on John. "You want to play the good guy, huh?" Blake growled, taking another step forward until he was practically nose to nose with John. "Fine. Let's see how tough you really are." Before anyone could react, Blake swung his fist toward John's face, aiming for a punch that would have knocked most men off their feet. But John was no ordinary man. Years of training in wrestling and mixed martial arts had honed his reflexes to near perfection. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped the blow, avoiding it effortlessly. Then, without missing a beat, he countered with a swift but controlled strike to Blake's midsection, causing the biker to double over in pain. The crowd gasped audibly, some covering their mouths in shock while others cheered quietly. Laura, still seated on the ground, winced at the sight but couldn't help feeling a flicker of relief. For the first time since the incident began, she felt like someone was truly standing up for her, not just with words, but with action. Blake staggered backward, clutching his stomach as he tried to catch his breath. His friends exchanged panicked glances, unsure of whether to intervene or stay out of it. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. John didn't press his advantage. Instead, he stood his ground, his expression calm but resolute. "I don't want to fight you," he said firmly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "But if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it." Blake straightened up slowly, his face twisted in anger and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could say anything, one of his friends stepped forward. "Come on, man," the younger biker urged, placing a hand on Blake's shoulder. "This isn't worth it. Let's just go." For a moment, it looked like Blake might resist. His jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists again. But then, after a long pause, he let out a frustrated growl and turned away, storming back toward his motorcycle. The rest of the bikers followed suit, mounting their bikes and revving their engines loudly as if to make one final show of defiance. Within seconds, they were speeding off down the street, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes in their wake. As the sound of their engines faded into the distance, the crowd erupted into applause. People clapped and cheered, some whistling in admiration, as they surrounded John. One elderly man patted him on the back, thanking him for stepping in. A young mother holding her child's hand smiled warmly, saying, "We need more people like you in the world." John nodded politely, accepting their gratitude with humility, but his attention quickly returned to Laura, who was still sitting on the ground looking shaken but relieved. He knelt beside her again, his expression softening as he asked, "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Laura hesitated for a moment, then nodded weakly. I think so," she stammered, her voice trembling. "My wrist hurts a little and my back, but I'll be fine." She glanced at John, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. If you hadn't shown up, you don't have to thank me," John interrupted gently, offering her a reassuring smile. "I'm just glad I was here to help." By now, several people had gathered around Laura, eager to assist her. A middle-aged woman named Karen offered to call an ambulance, pulling out her phone as she spoke. "We should get you checked out, just to be safe," she said kindly, her brow furrowed with concern. Another man, Eric, stepped forward to retrieve Laura's groceries, which had scattered across the sidewalk during the commotion. John stayed by Laura's side, helping her back into her wheelchair and ensuring she was comfortable. As the paramedics arrived a short while later, he gave her one last encouraging smile before stepping back to let them take over. Though the immediate danger had passed, the memory of what had happened and the kindness of the stranger who had intervened would linger with Laura for a long time to come. As John walked away from the scene, blending back into the flow of pedestrians, he couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. It wasn't the first time he'd stepped in to defend someone in need, nor would it likely be the last. But every act of courage, no matter how small, mattered. And as he disappeared into the crowd, the whispers of admiration following him served as a reminder that even in moments of darkness, there was always light to be found. As the paramedics tended to Laura, checking her vitals and gently examining her for any injuries, John stood nearby, watching silently. His presence was a comforting one, even though he didn't say much. People from the crowd still lingered, unwilling to leave just yet. Some were curious about how things would unfold, while others simply wanted to ensure that Laura was truly okay. The atmosphere had shifted from tension to relief, but there was still an undercurrent of unease. Everyone knew what had happened could have ended far worse. Laura sat in her wheelchair, her hands clasped tightly together as she tried to steady her breathing. Her wrist throbbed slightly and her back ached from the fall, but she felt fortunate that nothing more serious seemed to have occurred. Still, the emotional toll of the incident weighed heavily on her. She kept replaying the moment. When Blake had kicked her wheelchair, the fear and helplessness washing over her all over again. It was only when she glanced up at John, who gave her another reassuring nod, that she felt a small sense of calm return. One of the paramedics turned to John, asking if he'd witnessed the entire incident. He nodded and recounted what had happened, his tone factual but firm. The guy didn't just knock her over, John explained. He was yelling at her, blaming her for being in his way. Then he kicked her wheelchair hard enough to tip it. That's not an accident, it's assault. The paramedic frowned, clearly disturbed by the description. We'll make sure this gets reported, he said, jotting down notes on his clipboard. If you're willing to give a statement later, it could really help. John didn't hesitate. Of course, he replied without missing a beat. Whatever she needs, I'm here for it. His words drew approving nods from the onlookers, who were still gathered around. Karen, the woman who had called for the ambulance, stepped closer to John, her eyes filled with gratitude. You didn't have to do what you did, she said softly. But I'm so glad you did. There aren't many people who would stand up like that. John shrugged modestly, brushing off the praise. It's not about me, he said simply. It's about doing the right thing. Anyone else in my position should have done the same. Karen smiled, though her expression remained thoughtful. Maybe, she admitted, but not everyone would. You made a difference today, for her and for all of us who saw it happen. Meanwhile, Eric, the man who had helped gather Laura's scattered groceries, returned with her belongings neatly packed into a reusable bag. He handed it to her with a warm smile. Here you go, he said. Everything's back where it belongs. Well, almost everything. Your banana got a little squished, but I think it'll still taste fine. Laura managed a small laugh despite herself, which surprised even her. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I would have done without all of you. Eric waved off her thanks. Don't mention it, he replied. We're just glad you're safe. As the paramedics finished their initial assessment, they confirmed that while Laura had sustained minor injuries, a sprained wrist and some bruising, she was otherwise stable. They recommended taking her to the hospital for further evaluation, especially given her pregnancy. Laura hesitated at first, reluctant to cause more trouble, but John gently encouraged her to go. Better safe than sorry, he told her. Your health and your baby's is the most important thing right now. With the paramedics' assistance, Laura was carefully loaded into the ambulance. Before they closed the doors, she looked out at the crowd one last time, her gaze lingering on John. Thank you, she said again, her voice stronger this time. For everything. John gave her a thumbs up and a reassuring grin. Take care of yourself, he said. And don't let anyone tell you that you can't stand up for what's right. You're stronger than you think. The ambulance drove away, its siren wailing softly as it disappeared down the street. The crowd began to disperse slowly, the energy of the moment fading as people returned to their daily routines. But the impact of what had happened lingered, in the air, a reminder of both the cruelty and compassion that existed side by side in the world. Later that evening, News of the incident spread quickly across social media. Videos captured by bystanders showed John stepping in to defend Laura, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Blake's aggression. Clips of the confrontation went viral almost instantly, sparking widespread outrage and admiration. Many praised John for his bravery, calling him a real-life hero. Others expressed anger toward Blake and his gang, demanding justice for Laura. Laura herself was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. After being discharged from the hospital with instructions to rest and avoid strenuous activity, she returned home to find dozens of messages waiting for her online. Strangers had sent words of encouragement, sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity or standing up against bullies. Local businesses offered to send her meals or gift cards to help ease her recovery. Even the mayor of the city reached out, commending her resilience and promising to look into stricter measures against harassment and violence. For John, the attention came as no surprise, though he handled it with characteristic humility. In interviews, he emphasized that his actions were not extraordinary. They were simply what anyone should do when faced with injustice. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," he said during one televised appearance. "I was just doing what needed to be done. We all have a responsibility to look out for each other, especially those who might not be able to protect themselves." Despite his modesty, John's intervention resonated deeply with people. Parents used his story to teach their children about kindness and courage. Teachers discussed it in classrooms as an example of standing up for what's right. Even celebrities chimed in, praising John for using his platform to highlight issues of bullying and inequality. Meanwhile, authorities wasted no time tracking down Blake and his gang. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses provided clear evidence of the attack, and witnesses, including John and several members of the crowd, were eager to cooperate with law enforcement. Within days, Blake was arrested and charged with assault and reckless endangerment. His friends, who had been identified as accomplices, also faced legal consequences for their roles in the incident. During his court hearing, Blake attempted to defend himself, claiming that Laura's wheelchair had been an obstacle and that he hadn't meant to hurt her. But the judge was unmoved, citing the overwhelming evidence against him. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable," the judge declared sternly. "You targeted a vulnerable individual and caused harm, not just physically, but emotionally. Society cannot tolerate such actions." Blake was sentenced to several months in jail, along with mandatory anger management classes and community service. While some felt the punishment was too lenient, others saw it as a step toward accountability. For Laura, the verdict brought a sense of closure. Knowing that Blake would face consequences for his actions helped her begin the process of healing. In Rio, the weeks that followed, Laura continued to recover, leaning on the support of her family, friends, and the broader community that had rallied around her. She started attending therapy sessions to address the trauma of the incident, slowly rebuilding her confidence and sense of security. Though the experience had left scars, both physical and emotional, it had also shown her the power of human kindness and solidarity. As for John, he remained humble about his role in the events that day. When asked how he hoped people would remember the incident, he smiled thoughtfully. "I hope they remember that we're all capable of making a difference," he said. "It doesn't take much to stand up for someone who needs help. Sometimes all it takes is saying enough. And when enough of us say it, the world becomes a better place." Those words echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines faded. They served as a reminder that acts of courage, no matter how small, could inspire change, not just in the lives of individuals but in the collective spirit of humanity. The weeks following the incident brought a mix of emotions for Laura Bennett. On one hand, she was grateful for the outpouring of support from strangers and loved ones alike. Friends dropped by her apartment with meals and kind words, while neighbors checked in regularly to see if she needed anything. Even people she had never met sent messages of encouragement, sharing their own stories of resilience and offering advice on how to cope with trauma. But on the other hand, the memory of that day lingered like a shadow, creeping into her thoughts at unexpected moments. Laura found herself replaying the scene over and over again in her mind. She could still hear the revving of Blake's motorcycle, feel the jolt as her wheelchair tipped over, and see the sneer on his face as he yelled at her. At night, these images invaded her dreams, leaving her restless and anxious. During the day, loud noises, like the rumble of engines or the screech of tires, made her flinch instinctively. It was as if her body refused to forget, even though her heart desperately wanted to move on. Her therapist, a gentlewoman named Susan, encouraged her to talk about what she was feeling. "It's normal to feel this way after something so traumatic," Susan explained during one of their sessions. "You went through something terrifying and your mind is trying to process it, but bottling it up won't help. Let yourself feel whatever comes up." At first, Laura struggled to open up. She didn't want to burden anyone with her fears or seem ungrateful for all the kindness she'd received. But slowly, she began to share more, not just with Susan, but also with her closest friends and family. Each time she spoke about the incident, she felt a tiny bit lighter, as if letting go of a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. One person who continued to play a key role in her recovery was John Cina. Though he had only been present for a brief moment that day, his impact on Laura's life was profound. After the incident, he reached out to check on her, sending a heartfelt message through social media. "I know things might feel overwhelming right now," he wrote, "but please remember that you're stronger than you think. Don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need someone to talk to." His words meant more to Laura than he probably realized. In the days and weeks that followed, they became a source of comfort whenever self-doubt crept in. She kept a screenshot of his message on her phone, reading it whenever she needed a reminder that she wasn't alone. Eventually, Laura decided to write back. At first, she wasn't sure what to say. How do you thank someone who has done something so meaningful? But then she realized that honesty was enough. "Thank you for stepping in when no one else did," she wrote. "Your kindness gave me hope when I needed it most. I don't know where I'd be without you." John responded almost immediately. "I'm just glad I was there," he replied. "Take care of yourself. And remember, you've got a whole community cheering you on." Their exchange marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Over time, Laura and John stayed in touch, exchanging messages about everything from her progress in therapy to his latest projects. He never made her feel like she owed him anything. Instead, he treated her like a friend who genuinely cared about her well-being. For Laura, having someone like John in her corner made all the difference. As Laura worked on healing emotionally, she also focused on rebuilding her confidence. Before the accident that left her in a wheelchair, she had been an active person who loved hiking, dancing, and exploring new places. Now, adjusting to life with limited mobility was challenging, both physically and mentally. Some days, she felt frustrated by the limitations her body imposed. Other days, she worried about how others perceived her, as weak or helpless. But with support from her physical therapist and encouragement from those around her, Laura started finding ways to adapt. She joined an online community for people with disabilities, where members shared tips, resources, and stories of triumph. Through the group, she discovered adaptive sports programs in her area, including wheelchair basketball and yoga classes, designed for individuals with mobility challenges. Hesitant at first, she eventually signed up for a beginner's session, telling herself it couldn't hurt to try. To her surprise, she loved it. The sense of camaraderie among the participants was infectious, and the physical activity helped her reconnect with her body in a positive way. For the first time since the accident, she felt a spark of excitement about the future. Maybe being in a wheelchair wouldn't define her after all. Maybe it could become just one part of who she was, a chapter in her story, not the entire book. While Laura focused on moving forward, the legal proceedings against Blake and his gang moved steadily ahead. Authorities had gathered substantial evidence, including video footage, witness statements, and medical reports detailing Laura's injuries. When the case finally went to trial, the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to see justice served. During the trial, Laura testified about what had happened that day. Sitting in the witness box, she felt nervous but determined. As she recounted the details, the fear, the pain, the humiliation, she noticed Blake avoiding eye contact, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if he regretted his actions. But then she reminded herself that it didn't matter. What mattered was speaking her truth and holding him accountable for what he had done. When it was John's turn to testify, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. People leaned forward in their seats, hanging on his every word as he described intervening to protect Laura. His calm demeanor and clear recollection of events painted a vivid picture of the confrontation, leaving no doubt about Blake's culpability. By the time John stepped down from the stand, the jury seemed convinced. In the end, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Blake was sentenced to 2 years in prison, along with mandatory anger management courses and restitution payments, to cover Laura's medical expenses. While some critics argued that the punishment wasn't severe enough, Laura felt a sense of relief. Knowing that Blake would face consequences for his actions allowed her to close that chapter of her life and focus on what lay ahead. For John, the trial reinforced his belief in standing up for what's right. In interviews afterward, he emphasized that anyone could make a difference in situations like this. "It's not about being famous or strong," he said. "It's about recognizing when someone needs help and having the courage to step in. We all have the power to create change, if we choose to use it." His message resonated deeply with people across the country. Schools invited him to speak to students about bullying prevention and empathy. Community organizations asked him to participate in campaigns promoting kindness and inclusivity. Even corporations sought his advice on fostering cultures of respect and accountability in the workplace. Through it all, John remained grounded, using his platform to amplify voices that often went unheard. He partnered with disability advocacy groups to raise awareness about accessibility issues and combat stereotypes. He also worked closely with anti-bullying initiatives, sharing his story to inspire others to take action when they witnessed injustice. For Laura, seeing John's commitment to making a difference inspired her to find her own voice. She began writing about her experiences, documenting her journey from victim to survivor in a blog that quickly gained traction online. Her posts were honest and raw, tackling topics like grief, resilience, and the importance of community support. Readers connected with her vulnerability, flooding her comment section with messages of gratitude and solidarity. Encouraged by the response, Laura decided to take things a step further. With John's encouragement, she started giving talks at local schools and community centers, sharing her story and urging others to stand up for themselves and each other. At first, public speaking terrified her. But as she stood in front of audiences, watching their faces light up with understanding and determination, she realized that her voice had power. By the time a year had passed since the incident, Laura's life looked vastly different from what it had been before. She was stronger, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. She had built a network of supportive friends and allies who believed in her and cheered her on, and she had found purpose in advocating for others, turning her pain into something positive. Looking back, she knew she wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, but she also knew that it had shaped her in ways she never could have anticipated. It had taught her the value of resilience, the importance of compassion, and the incredible strength that comes from standing together as a community. And through it all, she carried with her the memory of a stranger who had changed her life forever. John Cina may have walked away from that intersection long ago, but his actions had left an indelible mark, one that would continue to inspire Laura and countless others for years to come. As months passed, Laura's transformation became more evident, not just to those around her but to herself. The once timid and hesitant woman who had doubted her ability to face the world was now a beacon of hope for others. Her blog, which started as a personal outlet to process her emotions, grew into a platform that reached thousands of people. Readers from all walks of life shared their own struggles, stories of bullying, disability, pregnancy challenges, and moments when they felt invisible or powerless. Laura responded to each message with care, offering words of encouragement and reminding them that they weren't alone. Her growing confidence inspired her to take on new challenges. She joined a local advocacy group focused on improving accessibility in public spaces. Together with other members, she lobbied city officials to install ramps, widen sidewalks, and add tactile paving for visually impaired individuals. At first, the process was slow and frustrating. Bureaucratic red tape often stood in the way, and some decision-makers dismissed their concerns as unimportant. But Laura refused to give up. Drawing strength from her experiences, she spoke passionately at town hall meetings, sharing how simple changes could make a world of difference for people like her. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting, where progress seemed impossible, John sent her a text. "How's it going?" he asked simply, knowing full well that she might need a boost. Laura smiled as she read his message. "Honestly, it's tough," she replied. "Sometimes I feel like we're shouting into the void, but then I remember why I'm doing this and I keep going." John's response came quickly. "That's what makes you amazing. You don't quit. Keep fighting the good fight. I'm rooting for you." His words reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about recognition or praise, it was about making life better for others. With renewed determination, Laura returned to the advocacy work, pushing harder than ever before. Slowly but surely, things began to change. New ramps appeared outside businesses, crosswalk signals were updated with audio cues, and even small gestures, like reserved parking spots closer to entrances, made daily life easier for many. Around the same time, John continued using his influence to shine a light on issues close to Laura's heart. He partnered with organizations dedicated to supporting pregnant women with disabilities, funding programs that provided resources like adaptive maternity wear and counseling services. He also launched a campaign called Stand Up, Speak Out, aimed at educating young people about the importance of standing against bullying and injustice. Through videos, workshops, and social media posts, he encouraged students to be allies instead of bystanders. The campaign gained traction quickly, especially after John shared Laura's story during a televised interview. Sitting across from a talk show host, he spoke candidly about the day he intervened and how it had impacted him. "I didn't think twice about stepping in," he said. "But what stayed with me afterward was realizing how much courage it takes for someone like Laura to keep moving forward, despite everything she's been through. She's my hero." When Laura saw the clip online, tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't believe that someone as accomplished as John considered her a hero. To her, she was just doing what she had to do, surviving, adapting, and trying to make the best of a difficult situation. But hearing him say those words made her realize something important. Being a hero wasn't about grand gestures or superhuman feats. It was about showing up day after day and choosing to keep going no matter how hard things got. Inspired by John's campaign, Laura decided to collaborate with him on a special project. They worked together to create a series of videos featuring real-life stories of resilience and kindness. In one segment, Laura recounted her experience with Blake and how John's intervention had changed her perspective. In another, John interviewed a teenager who had stood up to bullies at school, risking his own safety to protect a classmate. Each video ended with a call to action. What will you do today to make someone's life better? The series resonated deeply with viewers, sparking conversations about empathy, accountability, and the power of collective action. Teachers incorporated the videos into lesson plans, parents used them to discuss values with their children, and community leaders referenced them in speeches. For Laura and John, seeing the impact of their collaboration was incredibly rewarding. It reinforced their belief that even small acts of kindness could ripple outward, creating waves of positive change. Despite their busy schedules, Laura and John stayed in touch regularly. They exchanged messages frequently, updating each other on their respective projects and offering support whenever needed. Occasionally, they met in person, grabbing coffee or attending events together. Their bond had grown beyond gratitude and admiration. It had become a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared goals. One weekend, John invited Laura to join him at a charity event benefiting families affected by domestic violence. Nervous but excited, she accepted. The event was held in a large banquet hall decorated with banners and tables filled with donated items. Attendees mingled, chatting animatedly while volunteers served food and handed out informational brochures. When John introduced Laura to the crowd, explaining her role as an advocate and survivor, the room erupted in applause. Afterward, several attendees approached Laura, thanking her for sharing her story and expressing how much it meant to them. One woman, clutching her young daughter's hand, told Laura how her words had given her the courage to leave an abusive relationship. Another man, whose wife used a wheelchair, thanked her for raising awareness about accessibility issues. By the end of the night, Laura felt overwhelmed, but in the best possible way. As the evening wound down, John found Laura sitting at a quiet corner table, sipping tea and reflecting on the day. "You did great," he said, sliding into the chair beside her. She looked up, smiling softly. "Thanks to you," she replied. "I wouldn't have been here if it weren't for you." He shook his head, dismissing the compliment. "Don't give me too much credit. You're the one who's making all this happen. I'm just along for the ride." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as volunteers packed up the remaining items and turned off the lights. Then Laura spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in that day?" John nodded slowly. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on what-ifs. What matters is what we do next. How we move forward and use our experiences to help others." His words stayed with Laura long after the event ended. They reminded her that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still hers to shape. And she intended to fill it with purpose, compassion, and action. In the following months, Laura expanded her advocacy efforts, focusing not only on accessibility, but also on mental health and maternal care for women with disabilities. She partnered with hospitals to provide training for medical staff on treating patients with physical limitations and worked with schools to create inclusive environments for children with special needs. Her tireless dedication earned her recognition from local leaders who honored her with an award for community service. Accepting the award, Laura took a deep breath and addressed the audience. "There was a time when I thought my life was over," she began, her voice steady. "I felt broken, scared, and unsure if I'd ever find joy again. But because of the kindness of strangers, people like John Cina, I learned that pain doesn't define us. Resilience does. Compassion does. And the connections we build with one another can carry us through even the darkest times." The crowd erupted in applause, rising to their feet as Laura stepped back from the podium. Among them was John, clapping enthusiastically with a proud smile on his face. As their eyes met across the room, they both knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, so many lives to touch, and so many stories yet to unfold. But together, and with the support of countless others, they were determined to keep moving forward, proving that even in a world filled with challenges, hope and humanity could prevail. Write Part 6. Of 1150 words in a separate document, and it should be interesting, and write it in third-person style. And it should be in simple and basic English. Use simple and basic English and without hating Quen 2.5. Max, as the years rolled on, Laura's journey of growth and advocacy continued to inspire those around her. What had started as a personal mission to heal and rebuild her life had transformed into something far greater, a movement that touched the lives of countless individuals. Her story became a testament to the power of resilience, showing others that even in the face of adversity, it was possible to rise stronger than before. Laura's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers began featuring her work, highlighting how she turned pain into purpose. One article described her as a force for good, while another called her the heart of change in her community. These accolades weren't just empty words. They reflected the real impact she was making. People from all over the country reached out to thank her for giving them hope and courage. Some shared how her advocacy had directly improved their lives, whether through better access to public spaces or simply by reminding them that they mattered. Despite the recognition, Laura remained humble. She often said,